The rain had fallen without pause for 13 days, soaking into the cracked ruins of the outpost, and pooling around the broken frame of the woman who still waited there. Her once vibrant skin was now dulled, her voice hoarse from cries that had long since faded into silence. Her fingers trembled when she reached again for the shattered transmitter, a hopeless ritual she performed every morning and night. Each time, she whispered into it, her voice barely more than a breath. "Please, someone, anyone." The device sparked weakly but sent no message beyond the cursed atmosphere. She no longer had the strength to cry aloud. Only a thin whimper escaped her dry lips, a sound so soft it vanished into the endless gray storm. Her memories clung to her mind, sharp and cruel. She remembered laughter echoing in these now dead halls, families, younglings, their future bright. She remembered the day it all ended, the ground trembling, the alarms blaring, the walls cracking like fragile eggshells under invisible fists. They had never even seen what struck them down. Survivors screamed orders into the comms, begged for help, but every outgoing message was blocked. The government's answer was swift and merciless, a black quarantine, forbidding any ship to land, sealing them with their fate. On the 5th day, she realized that no one was coming. On the 7th, she lost count of how many companions had fallen into death's silence. On the 10th, hunger gnawed her bones so deeply that she could no longer crawl to the food rations hidden in the collapsed kitchens. Still, every day, every hour she could remain conscious, she repeated her message into the storm. Not because she believed it would work, but because not trying seemed worse than death itself. The cold bit through the remnants of her clothing. Strange noises crept from the distant ruins, low growls, strange clicking sounds that did not belong to any creature she had known. The fear of them hollowed her out, made her too terrified even to sleep properly. She would drift off, exhausted, only to wake to distant sounds of scratching and the creaking of warped metal. Sometimes she thought she saw movement in the swirling rain, black shapes slithering among the wreckage. But she could not tell if they were real or just a trick of her starving mind. On the 13th day, her hand slipped from the comms device for the last time. She lay against the cold, jagged wall, eyes half closed, her body refusing to answer her will. The rain hammered her skin, each drop a small icy needle. She thought she heard a voice, a real one, deep and clear, but she had imagined voices before, many times. It was only another hallucination, another cruel trick. She did not lift her head. There was no reason to. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about death. Not in fear, not even in sorrow. Only as a simple, quiet thing. A door she would pass through. No pain, no cold, no loneliness anymore. She thought of her family, lost to the darkness, and wondered if she would see them again. The thought was almost comforting. She closed her eyes. The storm roared, but she no longer heard it. Somewhere deep within her mind, she thought she felt warmth, a brief touch on her shoulder, but it was impossible. Nothing warm could exist in this dead place. Her breathing slowed, her pulse fluttered weakly. If death came now, she would not fight it. A single tear slid down her face, unnoticed. It mingled with the rain, a tiny salt drop lost in an ocean of despair. The galaxy was vast beyond comprehension. So many worlds, so many lives. And yet in all that endless sprawl, she had become nothing, a forgotten whisper trapped on a dying world. Billions of beings crossed the stars each day, carried by ships and dreams and ambitions, and not one had stopped to hear her desperate call. The thought should have made her angry, should have sparked some flicker of fury. But all she could feel was the endless ache of abandonment. She did not know how long she lay there, half-conscious, time slipping away like sand between numb fingers. She dreamed, or thought she dreamed, of sunlight warm and golden. A memory from a life too distant to touch. She dreamed of voices calling her name, but when she strained to hear them, they dissolved into meaningless noise. She dreamed of footsteps crunching in the broken debris, drawing closer, and of a voice speaking words she could not understand but whose tone, somehow, filled her chest with warmth. If she could have spoken, she would have begged the dream to stay. She would have clutched it with her last strength. But no words came. Only the soft, rattling sound of shallow breaths. Another whisper in the universe. Another life slipping away. The stars above the ruined world remained hidden behind thick clouds. No light shone through. In those final moments of awareness, she stopped searching for salvation. She stopped hoping for miracles. She accepted the truth that had gnawed at her soul for 13 endless days. There would be no rescue. No hand reaching out through the void. She was truly, utterly alone. The old Earth-class survey ship wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the quarantine zone. Red warnings flashed across its outdated consoles, but the pilot ignored them. Orders were clear: scan for salvage, avoid landing, and don't get involved. But even over the ancient equipment's static, a faint, broken distress signal caught his attention, fragile and desperate. It wasn't a signal from a machine, it was a voice. Weak, pleading, carrying a pain that couldn't be faked by any beacon. He leaned in closer, adjusting the receiver manually. Against every protocol, against training drilled into him by superiors who valued risk assessments over lives, he turned the ship toward the forbidden planet. The atmosphere battered the hull as he descended, but the ship held together with the stubbornness of old Earth tech, built in a time when humans believed in making things last forever. The pilot guided the vessel lower, ignoring the screeches of protest from the onboard AI. Through the thick haze, the remains of a settlement emerged, broken buildings half swallowed by vines, roads cracked into twisted veins across the landscape. It was worse than he imagined. His boots hit the muddy ground with a wet slap, and the air smelled of decay and rain. He moved fast, driven by something deeper than orders or reason. Somewhere out there, a living being was still fighting to survive. He could feel it as clearly as if the voice had been burned into his blood. Every step closer, the sensation grew stronger, a gut-level certainty that someone needed him, and he was already almost too late. No sound greeted him except the endless drumming of rain. His tracker struggled to lock onto the weak signal, pulsing erratically like a dying heartbeat. He pushed forward, boots sinking into the muck, heart pounding. Time blurred into a relentless push against fatigue and hopelessness. Around him, the ruins seemed almost to resist his passage, as if the very planet wished to keep its secrets buried. When he finally found her, his breath caught in his throat. Curled against the shattered wall of a crumbling outpost, she looked so small, so fragile, he feared even touching her would cause her to vanish. Her skin bore unfamiliar hues, muted now by cold and hunger, but the expression on her face, the sheer raw agony, was universal. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, shrugging off his jacket and wrapping it around her trembling form. She didn't react at first, lost somewhere beyond pain and fear. Only after several long moments did her cracked lips move, forming words he couldn't understand. But the meaning was unmistakable. She was begging him not to leave. Her fingers, thin and trembling, clutched weakly at his sleeve. He gently gathered her into his arms, feeling how light she was, how dangerously close she teetered to death. The pilot whispered reassurances he wasn't sure she could even hear. The words didn't matter. It was the presence, the undeniable, unbreakable fact that someone had come. Someone had answered. He moved carefully, shielding her from the rain, cradling her like the most precious thing he had ever carried. The terrain back to the ship felt twice as treacherous with her life depending on every step, but he moved with a steady, deliberate urgency. Nothing else in the universe existed now. No protocols. No warnings. No orders. Only this moment and the fragile life in his arms. The ship's ramp groaned as it opened, and the warmth inside hit them like a wave. He laid her gently on a stretcher, activating the ship's medical systems. Alarms flared to life, diagnosing malnutrition, dehydration, and dangerous hypothermia. Automated arms moved to work, delivering emergency fluids and stabilizing her vitals. He stayed at her side, refusing to leave even as the systems urged him to retreat to safety protocols. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting his gaze. There was fear in them still, but also something else, a glimmer of hope so faint it almost broke him. He took her hand, offering the simplest, most human comfort he could. She gripped it with surprising strength, as if anchoring herself to life through him alone. He didn't speak. There were no words powerful enough to bridge the gulf of loneliness she had endured. Only presence mattered. Only the shared silence between two beings who, against all odds, had found each other in the vast, indifferent universe. As the ship ascended through the churning skies, the AI issued endless warnings about quarantine breaches, contamination risks, and the severe penalties for harboring an unknown life form. He acknowledged none of them. There would be consequences later. Right now, survival was the only law he obeyed. Survival, and something else, something older than any law, written into the DNA of humanity from the first days they huddled around fires against the darkness, the refusal to abandon those who cried for help. She drifted into unconsciousness again, but this time her breathing was stronger, steadier. The monitors showed slow, painful improvement. Against all reason, against every calculation of probability, she was fighting to live. Not because she had hope. Hope had been burned out of her long ago. But because finally, someone had reached out. Someone had answered the cry that everyone else had ignored. In that moment, he understood something deeper than duty, deeper than survival instincts. It wasn't just about saving her. It was about defying the universe itself. It was about saying, in the face of overwhelming silence and apathy, that one voice could still matter. That one human being, choosing to act, could make a difference that no power, no empire, no decree could erase. The ship shuddered as it punched through the last layers of atmosphere, and stars spilled across the viewports. In the silent cradle of the void, a bond had been formed, not of language, not of blood, but of something older, something unbreakable. The rain was behind them now. Only the endless expanse of stars lay ahead, each one a silent witness to the promise made that day: you are not alone. The human pilot worked without rest, his focus narrowed to a single point: keeping her alive. Medical scans revealed organs damaged by exposure, muscles wasting from hunger, and a bloodstream fighting an infection native to the abandoned planet. Even with his ship's outdated medbay, he pieced together treatments from emergency protocols, adapting human technology to alien biology by instinct and desperate necessity. Hours bled into one another as he fought to stabilize her condition, ignoring the burning ache in his own limbs and the exhaustion clouding his mind. She woke in brief, fitful moments, her body racked by fever and weakness. Each time, her gaze found him, full of silent terror that he might vanish, that her fragile grip on life might slip away unnoticed. Each time, he was there. It didn't matter that they couldn't speak the same words. The simple act of presence, of shared humanity stretched across the gulf of species, was enough to push back the crushing weight of despair. Food was another battle. His stores weren't designed for her physiology, but starvation wasn't an option. He experimented carefully, offering tiny portions of nutrient solutions and monitoring her reactions. Some made her ill, others passed safely, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, her strength began to return. The first time she managed to sit up on her own, trembling and pale but alive, a tight knot of tension inside him finally loosened. He didn't celebrate. There was still a long road ahead. But in the quiet of the ship, with only the hum of life support and her ragged breathing, hope grew like a fragile flame. There were other dangers. The ship's systems detected traces of pathogens clinging to her clothing, her skin, even her breath. Alarms flashed constantly, warning of contamination. Protocol dictated she should be sealed away, possibly even ejected from the vessel. He disabled the alerts without hesitation. The idea of abandoning her, after all she had endured, was monstrous. He accepted the risk without question. Survival wasn't just about following procedures. It was about protecting each other, even when the cost was high. In the stolen hours between tending to her needs, he tried to piece together how she had come to be stranded. The settlement logs were corrupted, most records erased or destroyed. Still, he found fragments, half-finished transmissions, damaged footage. What emerged was a picture of horror. The colony had been attacked, not by external enemies but by their own environment. A planetary plague had swept through, leaving death in its wake. Quarantine orders had sealed them off, abandoning everyone on the surface to die slowly and alone. Yet somehow, she had survived 13 days longer than anyone thought possible. Wounded, starving, terrified, she had refused to surrender. The thought filled him with a fierce admiration. No ordinary being could have endured such suffering and still clung to life. Whatever her origins, whatever species she belonged to, she possessed a will to survive that resonated deeply with everything he respected about life itself. Days passed in a strange, fragile rhythm. He spoke to her constantly, explaining repairs he made to the ship, sharing stories about Earth, about a blue world full of storms and oceans and laughter. She didn't understand the words, but she listened, her expression softening, her body gradually shedding its defensive tension. In turn, she began to gesture, to mimic small movements that grew into a kind of shared language. A nod for yes. A tilt of the head for no. A faint touch against the heart to say thank you. Bit by bit, trust was woven between them. He learned to read her signals instinctively. When nightmares woke her, he was there with a hand she could grasp. When terror froze her in place, memories of whatever horrors she had endured, he remained close but non-threatening, giving her the space to find her own strength. Healing wasn't just a matter of medicine. It was patience, and presence, and unwavering respect for her autonomy. Still, survival was not guaranteed. Supplies were running low. Every moment they spent adrift in space was a gamble. Communication with Earth was impossible without revealing their position, and risking interception by authorities who would see her as a threat rather than a survivor. He weighed the risk in sleepless hours, calculating chances, measuring options. Always, he arrived at the same answer. He would not abandon her. Repairing the jump drive became his new mission. The ship had suffered damage during the risky landing, and the systems were temperamental at best. He cannibalized non-essential modules, rerouted power, worked until his hands were blistered and his muscles ached. She watched him from the medbay doorway sometimes, silent and solemn, her presence a quiet encouragement. He smiled when he caught her eye, a small reassurance that everything would be all right, even when doubt gnawed at his bones. One evening, after days of brutal labor, the jump drive finally powered up with a low, rising hum. Relief washed over him so fiercely he had to lean against the console to stay upright. They weren't safe yet, but they had a chance. A real one. He turned to find her standing there, wrapped in one of his spare jackets, her posture straighter now, her eyes clear. She placed her hand over her heart, and then extended it toward him, a gesture he had come to understand as deep gratitude. He knelt slightly to her level, returning the gesture. No words passed between them, but none were needed. In that moment, they were not rescuer and rescued, not alien and human, but two souls bound by shared struggle, shared survival, and a stubborn refusal to let the universe break them. As he plotted a course toward unregulated space, somewhere they could hide and heal without interference, he realized something else. Saving her hadn't just given her life back, it had saved him too. In a galaxy filled with cold logic and calculated indifference, the simple act of choosing compassion had rekindled a part of himself he thought long buried. They weren't safe yet. They weren't free. But they were together. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The stars outside the ship stretched into long, thin lines as the jump drive engaged, carrying them away from the planet that had almost been her tomb. He watched the readouts carefully, every muscle tense, knowing any mistake could rip the vessel apart. But against the odds, the systems held. They emerged into a quiet stretch of space, uncharted and unpatrolled, a forgotten corridor where they could vanish. It wasn't much, but it was hope, and that was something they both desperately needed. Her recovery accelerated now that they were away from the toxic environment. Fresh air, steady nutrition, and regular sleep began to knit her shattered body back together. Every small sign of strength, the way she moved a little easier, the way her eyes grew brighter, felt like a personal victory. He improvised new treatments, guided by intuition and the data he could salvage from the medbay, determined not to let his lack of experience cost her everything she had fought for. Even so, the scars of her ordeal ran deeper than the physical. She flinched at sudden noises. She tensed at unfamiliar systems powering up. She had seen too much, survived too much, to ever truly forget. He recognized the signs. They mirrored his own quiet battles with fear, guilt, and memories he could never fully bury. In the silent hours between shifts, he would sit across from her, sharing rations and simple gestures of comfort, building a bond that words would have only cheapened. She learned faster than he could have imagined. Within days, she mastered enough basic symbols and expressions to make her needs clear. He taught her human words, short, simple ones at first. Safe. Friend. Trust. She repeated them carefully, her voice rough from disuse, her face lighting up with triumph whenever she pronounced one correctly. Teaching her gave him purpose beyond mere survival. She wasn't just recovering, she was becoming part of his world, reshaping it with her presence. He discovered fragments of her story through these slow exchanges. She had been born in the colony, raised among settlers who had believed they could tame the hostile planet. Her people were not soldiers or conquerors. They were explorers, dreamers who had believed in the promise of new beginnings. When the plague came, it swept through their fragile society like a storm, and no help came. Their cries for aid were ignored, dismissed as contamination risks. They were written off as casualties before they had even died. Rage simmered beneath his calm exterior whenever he pieced together another detail. The galaxy prided itself on its civilization, its alliances, its supposed enlightenment. Yet when it mattered most, the system had abandoned the weak to save itself. It was a betrayal he understood far too well. Earth had seen the same callous indifference in its own history. Over and over again, the powerful had chosen convenience over compassion. And over again, ordinary people had chosen to defy that cold logic by standing together. He vowed silently that she would not be abandoned again. Their isolation had its risks. The ship's supplies dwindled. Fuel was limited. Communications were dangerous. Any distress signal could attract scavengers or patrols that would treat them as fugitives. Repairing the ship fully was beyond his means. Every journey deeper into unregulated space was a gamble with odds worsening by the day. But giving up wasn't an option. The path ahead was narrow and treacherous, but it was theirs, and they would walk it together. In moments of quiet, she would sit by the viewport, staring out into the endless night. He often joined her, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears and shared dreams. Without meaning to, they began weaving a vision of a future, one where they found a place among the forgotten edges of the galaxy, where survival wasn't just a desperate clawing against death but a chance to build something new. A life not just taken, but chosen. They faced new horrors as they drifted through lawless sectors. Warnings flashed on sensors, pirate activity, hostile encounters, abandoned wrecks that drifted like broken bones through the dark. Several times he had to power down completely, letting the ship float silently to avoid detection. Each time, she stayed close to him, trusting his judgment, steady even when fear clawed at her. One encounter nearly ended them. A raider frigate caught their trail, drawn by the faint emissions of their patched-together systems. The pilot fought a running battle against an enemy faster and better armed. He pushed the ship to its limits, throwing it into wild maneuvers that strained every bolt and seam. She clung to her seat, eyes wide but unpanicked, placing her faith in him without question. It was that trust that drove him beyond exhaustion, fueled every desperate evasive action until finally, through luck and skill, they escaped into a dense asteroid belt where the frigate could not follow. Afterward, the ship's systems were crippled. Hull breaches had to be patched manually. Life support teetered on the edge of failure. He worked until he collapsed, and when he woke, she was there, watching over him, a hand lightly resting against his arm. She had understood the sacrifice he had made to protect her. She had seen it, and she would not forget. In that battered ship, in that broken corner of space, they forged something stronger than any alliance, any treaty, any grand pronouncement from distant worlds. They forged loyalty. Family. A bond no hardship could break. She began to help with repairs, learning from observation and trial. Her hands, though still healing, grew more certain. Together, they scavenged what they could from derelicts, trading whispered plans and stolen glances filled with determination. Fear never fully left them, but it stopped ruling them. They moved forward because standing still meant death, and because they had found in each other something worth fighting for. At last, after what felt like an eternity of hardship, the navigation systems picked up a possible refuge, a hidden settlement deep in an asteroid cluster, a place where identities were fluid and questions were few. It was dangerous, but it was a chance. A place where they might disappear from the eyes of a galaxy that had already written them off. As they approached the coordinates, battered and scarred but alive, he glanced at her. She met his gaze, understanding the risks. She didn't flinch. She only nodded once, a simple, powerful gesture that said everything. They would face whatever came next, together. He smiled faintly, setting the course. Whatever the future held, they had already proven something far greater than survival. They had proven that compassion could endure even in the coldest corners of existence. And that sometimes, just sometimes, reaching out a hand to a stranger could change everything. The outpost was a jagged city carved into the bones of ancient asteroids, its structures clinging to the rock like stubborn weeds. Built from the wreckage of forgotten wars and broken promises, it was a place where survival was prized above status, where names meant less than deeds. As their ship limped toward a docking bay, the worn-out engines gasping for life, he knew they had only one chance to blend in, to find sanctuary among those who had been equally cast aside. The bay's doors closed behind them with a groan of tortured metal. Lights flickered. The air smelled of old grease, scorched plastic, and something more feral. Dockworkers barely glanced at them, too focused on their own desperate trades. Here, nobody asked questions. Here, anonymity was the only currency more valuable than credits. He stepped out first, scanning every angle, every possible threat, before motioning for her to follow. Her steps were hesitant, but there was steel beneath her careful movements now, forged from pain and survival. They bartered the last of their salvage for temporary lodgings, a cramped compartment in the lower sectors where the walls were thin and the locks unreliable. It didn't matter. It was shelter. It was a place to start again. He set about finding ways to repair the ship, hunting for parts in the chaos of the market floors, offering labor in exchange for favors. She stayed behind, securing their room, studying human customs and language from the battered data slates he brought her. Every day, she grew stronger, more certain of herself. Every day, the woman who had once cried out in desperation on a dying world became something new, someone who refused to be forgotten. News trickled through the settlement like smoke. Rumors of a girl, alien but human enough to pass with care. Whispers of a man who had defied bounty hunters and patrols alike to protect her. Danger loomed always at the edges of their new life. There were still those who would trade her existence for a quick profit, who viewed her as property lost and stolen. He worked quietly, ruthlessly, making contacts, gathering leverage. Trust was rare, but fear was a language everyone here understood. Slowly, carefully, he built a web of protection around them. Favored mechanics. Dockmasters who owed favors. Merchants who found it profitable to look the other way. He moved like a ghost through the underbelly of the outpost, always one step ahead of the threats that circled like wolves. She helped where she could, understanding that survival wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about making themselves indispensable, valuable, necessary to the fragile balance of the community. Their bond deepened, not with grand declarations but with small, vital acts. A steady hand when fear threatened to overwhelm. A whispered warning when danger crept too close. A shared meal in silence after a day of close calls. They didn't need words to know what they meant to each other. Trust had been earned in blood and sacrifice, and it was absolute. One evening, as the thin atmosphere filtered the distant stars into dim specks of light, he found her sitting by the viewport again, cradling a worn piece of cloth he had given her. A symbol of earth, stitched clumsily by his own hand, a gesture to remind her that she was no longer alone. She traced the pattern with trembling fingers, her eyes shining not with sadness, but with a fierce, painful gratitude. He sat beside her, saying nothing, letting the moment speak for itself. No galaxy, no empire, no indifferent power could take this from them. They had carved out a piece of hope with their own hands. Trouble came eventually, as it always does. A bounty hunter, too desperate or too stupid to understand the danger, tracked them to the outpost. He arrived under cover of darkness, armed and arrogant, thinking a lone man and a wounded girl would be easy prey. He was wrong. The hunter underestimated the strength born of suffering, the fury of two souls who had nothing left to lose. The fight was brutal, fast, and final. In the end, it was she who struck the killing blow, defending the only family she had left. She didn't cry afterward. She didn't falter. She simply stood over the fallen man, breathing hard, a survivor to the core. Afterward, the settlement shifted around them. Respect was a rare and dangerous commodity here, but they had earned it. No one would dare threaten them again, not openly. They had proven that they were not prey. They were something far more dangerous, people who had nothing but each other and the will to endure. In time, the ship flew again. Not sleek or perfect, but whole, bearing the scars of its journey with pride. They renamed it together, choosing a word from her old tongue and one from his, blending their pasts into something new. It wasn't just a vessel anymore. It was home. A symbol of defiance, of memory, of a future not dictated by fear or loss. They took to the stars, not as fugitives, but as pioneers. Quietly, carefully, they found others like them, forgotten souls scattered across the void, abandoned by the powers that had sworn to protect them. They built a network, a lifeline between the broken and the brave. He taught them how to survive, how to fight, how to endure. She taught them how to hope. Their legend grew slowly, whispered from port to port, told in the flicker of dying engines and the coded messages of those who refused to be erased. The story of a human who had heard a stranger's cry across the void and answered not with indifference, but with sacrifice. The story of a woman who had lost everything and yet refused to be less than whole. Together, they were a living testament that humanity wasn't measured by power or technology, but by compassion, by courage, by the simple, stubborn refusal to let another soul die unheard. Years later, when they finally found a true sanctuary, a hidden world built by those who had survived the galaxy's cruelty, they stood together on a hill overlooking their new home. The air was clean. The skies were wide and forgiving. Children's laughter echoed through the valleys, a sound so pure it hurt. She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation, two survivors bound not by blood but by something deeper. In that moment, they understood without words that they had won. Not by defeating enemies or claiming worlds, but by holding on to their humanity when everything else had been stripped away. They had endured. They had saved each other. And in doing so, they had proven that even in the darkest corners of existence, the light of a single act of kindness could change the course of a life, a world, a future. They had heard the cry of the abandoned, and answered it with everything they had. They were home.